Now, I've seen many tech talks, like many of you have, and it struck me that very few of them talk about the sort of interdisciplinary topics that we discuss, like corruption. So I want to talk today about rules, games, and corruption, and part of that will be the use of game theory to analyze corruption, as well as ethics, and perhaps the object of that, law. So let me start by talking about rules. Rules for cooperation. There's much talk about zero-sum games and non-zero-sum games and win-win situations, all that sort of thing. So what are these? Non-zero-sum or zero-sum game is a thing like, for example, tennis. If I score, it's good for me and it's bad for you. And if you score, it's bad for me and it's good for you. And then there are win-win situations, which you might also call positive-sum games, which are situations that are good for both of us, and people kind of relish in pointing out those win-win situations. It's sort of a thing at the moment, usually followed with some kind of triumphant smirk. And then we must also maybe not forget the less fashionable lose-lose situations, which are the ones where the outcome is bad for both you and me. So I want to propose to you that win-win situations are actually everywhere, abundant. When you engage in a trade on eBay, for example, then as a buyer of a good, you've done that probably of your own volition, then what you're buying is a good, so it's good for you. So it's better for you than the money that you would get in return. On the other hand, there is a seller, and the seller is also better off having engaged in the trade, of course, because for him, there's a healthy profit coming from it, and otherwise he wouldn't have done it. Win-win situations like that are actually abundant. We can find them anywhere. So whether you go to the pub for a pint or you go to the supermarket to buy some toilet paper, all of those are win-win situations I want to propose to you. I want to go a little bit deeper. I want to show to you why rules are actually important to us, and why it's not just about win-win situations. Now, that is the proposal that rules are, in essence, what makes us overcome uncertainty and makes transactions between each other cheaper. So, needless to say, when we think about the transactions on eBay, for example, then the question is, why is it possible that both of us can trust each other so that you can wire over some money to China and at the same time trust that the good will be sent across to you? How can we trust in this situation? The answer for this are rules. So let's start like an economist will talk about this in a sort of slightly crude fashion. Imagine a world where we don't have any rules, something like anarchy, for example. If you imagine you're a farmer, for example, in this world, and you set about, I don't know, growing some crops and storing some grain, then what you're encountering is a great deal of uncertainty. It's not so easy to just sell the stuff. It's very expensive because you have to make sure not just to be protected against droughts and storms, but also against loot and pillage. So you can't trust your neighbor that he just won't use violence to take the stuff off of you. So it's best to be short-termist and selfish in that situation. Why is it that we can, in fact, trust as a farmer to grow our crops or to send the money across to China and so on and so forth? It's because we have rules, good rules in this case, institutions like, in this case, eBay and PayPal, that make it possible for us to have these transactions with one another. You know, as a trader on eBay, if you're a seller, that if you send the good across, if you don't send the good across, if you don't play by the rules, that you will lose out. You will be barred from participation. This means a loss of trade and a loss of income. So in other words, people will keep to these rules. And what we get to is a sort of flourishing society. This is what we see all around us. Institutions, good institutions, work for us and make it possible that society prospers as we look through the centuries until where we are today. Now, I mentioned at the beginning corruption, so I want to definitely get back to that. How did I get to this? When I was a master's student, I had just quit my job. I was working in the IT industry for one of the large multinational corporations. And I found myself in a tricky situation where, on the one hand, I was paid double as much as I'm being paid now, which is 10 years down the line. On the other hand, I was grappling with the issue of the doctrine of profit maximization and so on. At the time, it was the financial crisis. This big company, one of the biggest companies in the world, had just laid off 25,000 people. At the same time, they paid $300 million to the top 5 individuals of the company. I thought, I need to study this. This is a big conundrum. I realized the sort of hard-to-digest truth that actually it's very hard to find a corporation that makes a negative net contribution to society. In fact, certainly my employer wasn't one of them. The numbers I told you are true, but at the same time, they are spending, they are paying in tax money vast amounts, much in excess of the 300 million, and they were employing several 100,000 employees across the globe. So I realized a real issue is not what corporations do when they're when they're not doing the right thing, perhaps. I was wondering what was wrong there. It was possibly the rules that were bad. But I realized one much bigger problem is corruption. Corruption, in fact, is the biggest obstacle to, one of the biggest obstacles at least, to human development. And here are just some numbers, so I'm not going to read them out to you, but I thought striking is, for example, that the World Bank reckons that 50% of its donations across history have not gone into healthcare, where they should have gone, for example, but into corrupt hands. And there are millions of facts out there. These are just some I plucked from the internet a day ago. So we want to think about what we could do about this. So let me go back to rules and corruption. I wanted to think about how I could study this problem. And initially, I was reading different articles in political science and political economy, and it struck me there were lots of different proposals. Some countries are rich in resources, others have scarcer resources. Some have hot climates or more moderate climates. All of these were explanations. People in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, and cultural things. In the end, I realized there's only one thing that really matters. And that was the rules that govern people's behavior. Rules act as incentives for how we act in the world. And the perfect place to start with this, and the answer really to it, was game theory for me. Because rules is about strategic interactions between ourselves, and the question of how the rules lead us to behave in the way we do behave. So how do we start? I started by thinking about corruption as a transaction. You have a briber who pays a bribe to an official, and these guys are engaging in this little transaction with each other, which might be a win-win situation for them. But you also have a loser, society. So if you look at it at a bigger scheme, not in that narrow sense, then actually it's a lose-lose situation, because society certainly is losing out, because whatever they're being corrupt about, it's not going to be good for society by definition. And at the same time, it is probably in the long run also bad for the initial perpetrators, because if you just imagine an example like Brazil, you'll have on the one hand millions of people that live in favelas. On the other hand, you've got a small rich elite that live in self-built golden prisons, high security, which they can only leave in armored vehicles, just because they have to fear that the money that they've made is going to be taken off of them by the people that are not as well off. You get where I'm going with that story. So let's think about how to think of corruption as a game. Here are sort of three people, if you like. You've got a briber and a public official, and you've got an inspector, and we can sort of take them as metaphors for groups of people in the society, if you like. The briber hands a bribe, gets some kind of permit that he likes, it's good for him, but it's bad for us because we don't want that guy to go about the business that he's doing. And you've got the public official, and you've got the inspector who's watching these guys going through piles of permits to see whether there's corruption in there or not. Now, what is the condition under which the briber pays the bribe? Crudely speaking, it depends on two things. On the one hand, he only pays it if the official is going to reciprocate, pays back the bribe, gives him back the permit. On the other hand, we need the briber to not fear that he's going to get incarcerated. So the balance has to be just right. In expectation, he needs to be better off by paying the bribe. Same goes for the public official. If he thinks he's going to go to prison with a too high a likelihood, then he's not going to accept the bribe and reciprocate, but instead decline it. Now, what about the inspector? We could think about his incentives too. So this inspector has a world in which he knows there's a certain relatively high punishment for both of the parties, and he's got a pile of permits. If he does his work in a diligent fashion, he's going to look through all of the permits and he'll realize there's no corruption in there, because the other guys can anticipate that. They can know that if punishment is high and every permit is checked, they wouldn't engage in the crime because they'll find out. So that is when the inspector thinks, well, maybe I shouldn't check all of them, just check sporadically. And this is where the chance creeps in that it might just make sense to pay a bribe or reciprocate. So what ensues is a complicated analysis, which I'm not going to bore you with, but what we can do instead is look at the results. So I want to think about rules as incentives again, how we can make sure that we undermine the corrupt behavior that we see there. Here are two ways of how we could do that, I propose to you. Two different punishment regimes. One regime would be what moral philosophers might call a deontological approach, a sort of rights-based approach, where we say we want just punishment. So if we want just punishment, we're looking at these two perpetrators, we're thinking both of them are guilty as each other because they're both in it together, then we should also punish them equally. That would be one proposal. And this is in fact what many countries do. Instead, we tried something else and we said, what happens if we punish them differently, if we have an asymmetric punishment regime? And the results were surprising. We found that if you punish bribers very little and you punish officials a lot, then what you do is you undermine the reciprocal relationship between the two. The probability of reciprocation goes right down because it never pays off if you have such a high penalty as an official. And then as a briber, as you know, your bribe will barely ever be reciprocated. You don't see much point in bribing either. So with the asymmetric regime, you end up with corruption being very low. With corruption very low, very few people will go to prison if they ever get caught. Now, if you compare the two regimes, in the first case what you'll find is, yeah, you've got a lot of people that are corrupt and you punish them justly, and you've got lots of people that justly punished are in prison. With the second regime, you've got very few people, little to no corruption, and very few people that end up in prison, albeit punished unjustly. Now, we could decide for the latter because that seems relatively intuitive to be the better answer to the problem, but the point is a little bit bigger than that. What I want to say is that we can use the tools that we're given in philosophy and economics in this case, and game theory, to understand problems like corruption and to analyze the law that we have in this and in many other cases to decide whether it's efficient in achieving the things that we want to achieve in society. And with that, I want to end by just saying what the nature of good rules is. So the final proposal is that I think that the best thing, that the good rules that we have, the institutions that govern our society, when they are good, are the best accomplishment of any society. Now, whether it is about the totalitarian governments that are becoming increasingly so when we're surrendering our rights and are being surveilled with every step that we do, all in the name of the fight against terror, or whether it's about corrupt regimes that dominate the population and take from it whatever they can. What I would like you to realize is that good rules, good institutions are the things that make us maximize our potential for win-win situations. They maximize the potential, they minimize the potential for lose-lose situation of which we're equally capable. And it's these good rules that prevent the types of situations that start so harmlessly with charismatic leadership and end so harmfully in war or tyranny. Thank you very much.